Okay, welcome back, everybody. So we just had two really interesting sessions on AI and creativity. So focused on various topics from automated scoring to human AI interaction and creative tasks. And so what we want to do in this panel is to kind of recap some of the findings and kind of look at the present and the future, kind of what we see as trends in this space and possible future directions in AI and creativity. And we can't promise to predict the future of either one of those, but we will try to point out some things that we think are interesting. And so I just want to start off with some trends that people see in the literature, whether that could be in our talks today. But what are some things that stand out to you? Janet, if you want to get us started.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that we are seeing many studies now coming out that are trying to more deeply understand the differences between a human-human interaction and a human-AI interaction versus so in creative context, so the human and a human creating together, or human and algorithm creating together, or a human and a tool creating together, and really trying to understand what are the differences at a behavioral level, but also at a cognitive level, and hopefully also at a neurocognitive level as well. And so I think that we're growing that body of literature that's really making those comparisons, but we lack studies to really understand and to be able to create a comprehensive framework in that area.
Yeah, one thing I thought was really interesting in your talk that you pointed out is that we're not talking about something that's just a static thing like human AI collaboration. It's a dynamic process that looks differently depending on the task and the stage that you're in. And so I think to me, that seems like an important thing a nuance to keep in mind as we're doing this kind of research, is to not just kind of lump it under one category of human AI collaboration, but to try to be as nuanced as we can as we're kind of looking at the process and the different tasks. But then at the same time, try to find some commonalities perhaps that cut across these different stages and tasks.
Yeah, and I think that what you touch on there is perhaps an emerging trend, but not necessarily a good one that's coming out, is that we see a lot of studies. I'd say that my inbox for asking for reviews has grown exponentially since ChatGPT and other tools in human AI research, creative research. But I think that we see a trend of publications going out that don't take into consideration those nuances. And I would really, I think we've seen fantastic work here today, but I would really encourage everyone who is considering embarking into studies with AI in any form to really reflect on some of these capacities, and to engage broadly in both the literature that comes from AI and from human-computer interaction, but also the research that comes from, for example, teams in brainstorming, or that area of maybe even more dyads, teams, organizational settings. So I think that it's really just a call for everyone out there to be rigorous with their immersion into the field.
Thank you, Janet. So Claire, what are some things that stand out to you in terms of trends? Could be your own work or anything that you heard today.
Well, I see a trend that is starting to thankfully come somewhat to an end, is ChatGPT is all you need. So I think that a lot of research, of course, they were the first on the market to to release these models to the public. So that's really great. But I think then I echo what Janet's just said, but then in my work, it's not about collaboration so much, but measurement and other aspects of creativity. But this critical voice that we are now trying to figure out what these systems are exactly doing and how what's that word again? Yeah. You can say it?
No.
But contrasting the human and AI creativity is also helping us, and also like reasoning and smart intelligence in general. It really helps us like define or redefine our constructs, make them more precise. So yeah, that's something that I think is a good thing that is emerging.
Yeah, that's a good point. So a lot of us tend to, and myself included, kind of refer to AI, and I think the association is, oh, that must have been with ChatGPT. But like, there are many other models out there. I think Annie even pointed out that you see differences across models in how they're behaving, and so I think you could even come up with an individual differences of the models themselves, to the extent that they'll be static, as they're always changing as well, but not to assume that kind of one size fits all, and this is the only thing that there is to being as a focus of study in AI creativity. Yeah, so Todd, what about you? What do you think is a kind of a trend in what you're seeing in the research?
Okay. Well, I'd say that it's an exciting time to be a creativity researcher, because all these AI developments are shifting the tectonic plates that are under the creativity research topic. And maybe some of you saw it, so who knows, but at one moment I proposed what I called the 7 C's of creativity, which if you sail the 7 C's, you got the whole domain of creativity. And it's 7 topics, each beginning with a C. And I see that SEE. I see that AI is impacting and leading to a lot of new research on each of these 7 topics. For example, on creators, who's the creative people? It might be somewhat different people now that they can access AI tools from who they were before. In the process creating, it's a different process to create with an AI tool. In collaborations, there's a new collaboration mode where you co-create. In context, the context of what these tools have been trained on as a database is impacting how much they're being creative, which is the kind of, let's say, bias. In terms of what they create, the creations, now we got all this work on our AI creations as good as human creations, stuff like this. So what does it mean? Now there's new definition, maybe creativity, we got to focus more on intentionality, okay, in the creation. There's a lot of stuff. There's consumption, there's curricula teaching to be creative. How do we teach people now to be creative? Well, it seems obvious. You got to teach something about how you can use or abuse these new tools. So I think that it's an exciting time, because from a sort of, I think, more like at the meta concept, every aspect of creativity is getting impacted.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, the question has been bouncing around in my mind related to how creativity is fundamentally changing with AI. Do you think it makes sense to measure creativity in the same way as we've been historically doing with ideation tasks and so forth, given that it's kind of so embedded, and it's almost have to kind of update how we're thinking about measurement? Or do those things still matter? Some of the talks today are kind of touching on this, about how individual differences and expertise could be kind of interacting with your ability to be creative with AI. But yeah, what do people think about whether assessment needs to change because of the new era that we're in?
Yeah, I can comment on that a little bit. So I think that it's a real question whether or not skills, whatever we want to call it, around, for example, divergent thinking or convergent thinking, does that matter the way that it mattered before? So are those really measures of creative potential, or parts of measures of creative potential anymore? How will we evaluate what creative potential is when there's access to various types of tools? So it's a question about not whether those tools are valid at measuring, for example, divergent thinking, still in a contained environment, but whether or not divergent thinking is something that matters to how we see creative potential in individuals. And I don't have an answer to that. I think it will only come with longitudinal studies.
Yeah, I was thinking about how assessment, the cool thing about like these divergent thinking tasks is that they correlate or predict some other aspects of creativity, but that's for people, right? So what I think that we're having trouble with right now is that we're assuming that we have this, like with intelligence and perhaps in certain ways in creativity, there's this G of all this positive manifold of the correlation. So it doesn't really matter what kind of general type of creativity task you're going to throw at me, that they will correlate to some extent with each other. But for the models, it's only going to correlate if they were highly trained on it. They've seen the data before. They can't, they can only interpolate, they cannot extrapolate. So it doesn't say anything for models, whereas it's still valuable for people. So it depends on what you want to measure and who you want to measure it for, and what you want to predict. So yeah.
Todd, anything on this one?
Okay, I'd say before, the field, in my opinion, was largely focused on assessing what a human can produce by humans who look at it. The topic just got multiplied or expanded to have two new parts added. The first part's semi-new. The first part is the creativity of a non-human entity, because there was some work, little known, on animal creativity and so forth. So that part just got big time boosted because we got these new entities that are not animals, but machine entities. And the new part, extra new part, is to what extent the human who can create alone, that still exists, may be evaluated by AI tools for assessment scoring. But to what extent a human can co-create with a machine, like this is the new thing to assess. So we need new tasks for that, but we should not throw away that we should measure a human alone too, because that still can happen.
And maybe not everyone wants to use AI. That's okay too.
Despite that, we've all turned into cyborgs with our phones next to us,
the old style, meaning human alone, we still need to assess that potential too.
Well, just very briefly, I guess it sort of begs this very provocative question when you, for example, see all of the lists of skills on OECD or whatever. Is creativity still one of them, or is it human AI co-creativity? I don't know. Is it individual human, or is it human capacity to interact in a certain way or create with AI?
All that,
or both?
I'd say all that is part of creativity. However you get the creative result, if you do it alone or you do it with a co-creation machine, that's okay. The skill is being creative.
So changing gears a little bit, one of the trends, at least in some of the talks today that I noticed, is that there's some biases in AI, right? We already kind of knew this coming in the door today, that there's some biases. There's this self preference bias that showed up in Claire's work and others. So like AI likes AI's ideas, humans like human ideas. What do we do with this? How do we like assess if, if you're trying to assess the AI creativity, do you just kind of go with a combination of the two? Or, I mean, there's other kinds of biases too that Claire and others pointed out in terms of elaboration bias, but then again, people actually tend to prefer longer responses too. So is that an issue, or is that something that's just, I don't know, any comments on general biases on the assessment side of things?
You want me to start?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot. forgot like what did you start with the question? Because that was the part that I wanted to answer.
Was basically like there's the self-preference bias of AIs liking their own ideas, and then there's also like humans.
It was about AI, and like we know that humans. So humans prefer humans, and AI prefers AI, and who do you believe whenever you're judging things? And so I think it has to be to the validity of which one scores more validly that translates better to real world applications beyond the assessment. And yeah, and then I'm guessing it's going to be human experts, because we can think beyond our training data. We can reason, and the models cannot. So
yeah, I would come back and think about, if you're asking, okay, which one should we use, should we trust? I would say more, I mean, to what end? Isn't it that we ultimately are still living in a human-centered world, and that the human preferences are going to be the ones that we as a society are valuing? So what do the humans ultimately think are the good X, Y, or Z are the ones that we as a society would generally agree with? But I have a case that I'm not quite sure about that actually has not been touched on today with AI and creativity, which I think is really interesting in the artistic field. AI as a curator for content. And it's something that a collaborator of mine has been investigating. So for example, on Instagram, the Instagram algorithms are trained to promote certain types of artwork, and young artists need to have a certain number of likes or fans or whatever on Instagram or anything to get into galleries. So it's this process of the artists are now not creating for other artists or for the general public. They're creating for the algorithms to promote their work, so that then they get recognized. And I think we just end up in this sort of what is it, Twilight Zone, that old Twilight Zone of how we operate. And so it's the question of, who are we making for? Who are we being creative for? Are we being creative for other humans, or are we being creative to be judged by algorithms, which will then put us in a situation to be evaluated by algorithms or humans?
Yeah. It's a tough one. I mean, one of the things that stood out to me in the talks was Jannike's finding about the higher correlations to external measures from the models more than humans, right? I mean, to me, that is really surprising, and that kind of points to like, well, maybe that could be if you want to kind of sidestep the issue of like, is the human the ground truth, or is the AI the ground truth? Like, how valid is the measure in terms of its correlations to other things that it should correlate with? And if humans aren't able to kind of like do a reliable enough job so that their ratings correspond to these external criteria, then yeah, I don't know. I think it's just an interesting finding. Do we have another? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Pepe. So there's a few things that are very interesting. One, the importance of context and intentionality. The need for looking at longitudinally, right, and just one session and look at creativity. I work in brain-computer interfaces, and now you can see people using these interfaces and AI to paint, right? So this is the ultimate example of co-creation, I would say. We have done that as well, where we measure brain activity while an artist is painting, and we generate a synthetic digital painting based on the brain activity of the artist, right? So I think that I think we need to start looking at the neural activity to understand the process of creativity longitudinally. And I would refer you to, we have 4 posters at this meeting where we're working with performing arts, with dancers and musicians to look at this question. What's the network? How the network evolves? And because they are professional, the skill level is not such a factor, but how they produce the choreography or the music. I think that I do think about, so I like some collaboration that could, that could help me rate with your methods the creativity of a piece of art or music or dance, so that I can correlate that to the biometrics that we're getting from the data, right? This is EEG, motion, eye gaze, many factors that add a lot of richness to the measurement that you are already getting, right? So just to summarize, I really agree longitudinal is important, and that perhaps the technological convergence that we are seeing with AI, BCI, and wearables might be the answer to these questions.
That this actually makes me think more about kind of interpretability of the different measures and stuff. And there's some talk about semantic distance today and other computational metrics that are actually more interpretable, that we know kind of what they actually are measuring versus like human ratings. AI rating is kind of like a black box, right? So it could be that in your case or anyone else that kind of wants to get at more kind of interpretable, meaningful kind of metrics that may not be all of creativity in itself, but kind of taken together can give like a more complete picture of the process that would correspond to creativity ratings, but again, kind of in and of themselves might not be the whole thing. And then we have a question over here. I guess I'll step down.
Certainly a very interesting set of questions and responses. But one of the things I see, not just here, but in many places, but certainly here, is that we're using AI basically to do what we've been doing before. And the question I ask is, can we use AI to allow us to think of doing things we couldn't have thought of doing before? And we have examples of this. I mean, computing has been around for a long time, but it's only relatively recently that people have started to think that maybe we need to change the way we educate people, and including in education, computational thinking. Well, that couldn't have existed before. That's the sort of thing. So I'm wondering, yes, we make the things we've been doing more efficient, and that's always a worthwhile goal. But it's not really a major change. It looks like it because we're inside this bubble. But what kind of change could one imagine that having something like this available to us that would change us and the world around us, rather than allow us to do what we've been doing before?
Well, this reminds me of like the more domain-specific AI things like AlphaGo and AlphaFold that help far better explore the creative space within the constraint of the rules of that game. And I feel like if we think back to Bowden's levels of creativity, that what the current typical out-of-the-box Gen AI is doing is more at that, the lower exploratory creativity level. So it actually does help us a little bit with idea generation maybe, but it doesn't help us explore the space. The models are literally trained to point us towards the regression to the mean. That's how they work. But these other models with their different kinds of tree search, and they include some sometimes like evolutionary algorithms, and that helps us like do the mutation and recombination that maybe we hadn't thought of. So it helps us better explore the space. So I think that would be a way like to have maybe for certain real world creative tasks, maybe within a domain, scientific creativity in biology or something, that could be helpful to use those types of models. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I could say one thing that we're exploring recently is using AI for real-time feedback. So feedback is something that we know is important for learning, but it's really hard to do, especially in a scalable and a quick way. So if you have, this is already something that's used in education with generative AI, is to having tutors and to help students. We could also use that for creative tasks too, to the extent that these models are providing meaningful feedback. Of course, you'd have to check that. I mean, the one thing that the automated scoring is unlocking, if to the extent that it's correlated to human ratings, which we have shown that it does, is you can actually just give that right back to participants as they're generating ideas, which is not possible without this kind of technology. So that's one thing it unlocks. You know, we have to see if that's something that's going to be beneficial, and you know what kind of qualitative feedback you might add beyond just giving them the score on their performance. But that's one thing I think that wouldn't have otherwise been possible.
Go with the microphone over there. I see a lot of hands.
Yep.
Thank you so much. I wanted to actually harmonize with that question, bring it into the art space, and touch base on something that Todd talked about earlier, that it's only trained on what it's trained on. And it seems to me in art, certainly as we've seen very common by our colleague in Oslo, the AI can generate very competent art, and also have heard in the lay press all about the music that's been created. But there seems to be a couple of possible Turing tests out there at this point, that it could still create art that looks real, like human made, but you could feed an AI with all of the music, the Baroque music in the world, and it would never come up with Mozart. You could feed it with everything prior to jazz, and jazz would be unlikely to emerge. And also Picasso would, and here we're in France, the Impressionists, based upon the previous, the paradigm shift innovations, it can't at this stage do. And the second thing that seems like a Turing test is that song you hear that send the chills down your spine. It gives you goosebumps. It has no way of figuring out how to do that. So it seems like we have a couple of domains that are quite solidly ours, although very few people can deliver on them. But maybe, but is there, you mentioned the algorithms that include a bit of chaos, but when these breakthroughs come through, they're pretty well focused, and that's not just random chaos, and pretty remarkable when they happen. And I'd love to hear your comments on that side of things.
Yeah, so I think, at least from my perspective, I wouldn't be asking the question about whether or not that is going to come from AI. I would be asking the question of whether that's going to come from a human AI collaboration, and in what way. Because that's also been, and I had a question with regards to the art earlier about what is this spectrum between looking at AI created versus looking at human created. I mean, I know personally artists who use AI, and they're developing their own algorithms. They are using the types of tools that are employing deep learning, whether it's generative AI or other forms of AI, in creating completely different styles, completely different sort of personifications of themselves through their art. And I think it would be very interesting to see if we get to this next phase, what's the next breakthrough in art? What's the next breakthrough in music? Is it going to be either in response to AI in some capacity, or is it going to be enabled by the breakthroughs in AI?
Yeah, well, I would just say that, first of all, the question for me is, to what extent what I call shake and bake creativity, which is you take a bunch of ingredients and you shake them around in the sack and you see what comes out. And if you do shake and bake chemistry, you get a lot of combinations of stuff, and eventually one of them could be a good drug. Okay. If you do it about 1 billion times, you eventually get a good drug, maybe. And so to what extent can you shake and bake ideas in a LLM system and something pops out that is a like paradigm shifter? Okay. Well, first you got to be able to recognize that it's a paradigm shifter and it's not just another piece of shake and bake junk. Okay. So I think humans are needed. And second of all, because I don't know if a LLM assessment tool can figure that one out. And second of all, I'd like to say that humans still have something different from a super chat GPT on steroids, okay? Which is, what do we got ultimately that's different? Each human, I don't know if you're gonna agree with this, each human is like our own little LLM, okay? And so you're different from each little LLM, and you got your personal idiosyncratic experience. What is the super glue of creativity, or the super, whatever you want to call it, ingredient? It's the idiosyncratic thing. And so a big LLM like a ChatGPT, been trained on everything on internet, sucked it all up. But it's got, you can each ask it a question, but it's like asking one single entity. You see, it's got no more idiosyncrasy in a way.
I think it's also worth saying, like, what is different about, like, what's different from the process. We need to characterize more. I mean, experience wise, episodic memory experiences, like, that's not available in these current models. I mean, you could talk about like embodied systems, you get into robots that are able to see, and you could multimodal and all that. But like currently, if you're just talking about generative language models, like it's not there. And so I don't know, Claire, did you have something on this, or was that Janet? Yeah.
Yeah, just very briefly in response to the shake and bake method, Todd, I think that if you look at it from an empirical sort of purely scientist hat on, then or researcher for specific types of research question hat on, then yeah, you run it millions of times, billions of times. Maybe you get something good out statistically, but I think we'll also be faced with a lot of ethical issues with regards to sustainability on simply saying maybe a chance, 1 out of what percentage, if I run this LLM for I don't know how many rounds, we'll get something out. We'll really be faced with, okay, is it worth it when it's going to have whatever impact it will have on our ecosystem?
Or political system.
Or political system, yes. So I think
Right.
that will
Exactly. It's a very good point. Very good point. You feed a human a banana and they can generate a bunch of ideas. You feed an LLM a nuclear power plant of energy, it can generate ideas.
Hi, I'm coming from the artist side. I'm not a scientist, but sometimes that can be useful because I'm seeing it from the outside. And I can see that as creativity scientists, you've been relying a lot on these AUTs and what I would call kind of creativity riddles. And the AI will always win. It's going to be better at solving riddles in my mind. Eventually, if it isn't now, it will be better tomorrow. But then what does the human creative being have to offer? And the part that the AI doesn't have is it doesn't have depth. It doesn't have real meaning making, and it doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have the felt experience. And then also, you know, at this moment, it's not the best curator, but it might actually become the best curator eventually. But that's, I guess, what I'm seeing is that maybe it's challenging the field to figure out how to actually measure, judge, and quantify something that's much bigger and harder to quantify than creativity riddles.
Thank you for that. So I've been told that we have to wrap up. So we'll have to continue this conversation. We did not solve AI and creativity today. I'm sorry. The riddle continues. But thank you all for coming here. It's been really interesting. Looking forward to talking to the rest of you the rest of the meeting today.